Victoria, Louise, Sophia, Augusta, Amelia, Helena, born into the heart of the British royal family, granddaughter to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and known simply as Helena Victoria, or to those closest to her, Thora. In the years to come, she would grow into a figure who quietly, persistently dedicated her life to the welfare of others, even if her name never rang out in the same triumphant chords as her more famous relatives. Hers would be a story of philanthropy, perseverance, and understated strength, one that began on a spring day at Frogmore House, Windsor, in the year 1870. From the start, Thora's life was intertwined with grand tradition and the immense weight of royal expectations. Her mother, Princess Helena of the United Kingdom, embodied a strong sense of charitable duty and inheritance from Queen Victoria herself. Her father, Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein, brought a certain Germanic heritage into the family, one that would later prompt suspicion in times of war. Thora was the eldest daughter in this branch of the royal line, arriving as the third child after her brothers Christian Victor and Albert, with younger siblings soon to follow. While most young royals faced rigorous schedules of etiquette lessons, language instruction, and public appearances, Thora discovered her personal inclinations leaning toward service from a very early age. Even as a small child, she displayed an unusually serious gaze and a calm determination. One could see her, aged merely 5, carefully gathering her playthings to donate them to a local orphanage, a hint of the generosity that would become the defining feature of her adulthood. Growing up in the royal residences near Windsor meant that her formative years were spent amid picturesque halls, well-tended gardens, and storied portraits of ancestors long gone. It's easy to imagine her as a young girl glancing up at the image of her formidable grandmother, Queen Victoria, and wondering if there was a place for her own story in the annals of royal history. There were no illusions about the significance of her lineage. She was a descendant of a woman who had lent her name to an entire era, the Victorian age. Yet Thora, as she was fondly called within her family circle, gravitated toward a future that felt less grandiose and more intimate, even humanitarian. Perhaps it was her mother's influence. Princess Helena was a patron of nurses and a dedicated philanthropist who instilled in her children the notion that royalty served a higher calling than merely attending glamorous receptions. There is a famous anecdote recounted in the diaries of a courtier who described how young Thora once asked her mother why they spent so much time teaching children to read and why some families couldn't afford tutors or books. Her mother's patient explanation awakened in Thora both empathy and a righteous sense of purpose. If reading and knowledge were so valuable to her, might they not be the key to a better life for others less fortunate? Those questions stuck with her, and her education emphasized not just the typical royal graces, like speaking eloquent French and playing Chopin preludes on the piano, but also the impetus to do good in any situation. Because the family prized a thorough education, Thora studied not only languages such as French and German, the latter a natural choice given her paternal heritage, but also history, art, and music. She could lose herself in her painting lessons for hours, capturing the gentle arcs of willow branches or the faint reflection of the sky on the surface of a quiet pond. There was a tranquility in those pursuits, but they also served to sharpen her mind. She learned precision in her brushstrokes, and that precision carried over into her sense of responsibility. Whenever her mother took her on charitable visits, Thora was the first to lend a hand, whether it was distributing clothing or writing letters for people who couldn't read or write. More than one nanny or court staff member remarked on how Thora would set aside her sketches the moment she heard of a philanthropic task. Her face lit up with a particular kind of happiness that came only when she could help. That sense of purpose deepened as she entered her teenage years. While some royal adolescents might have felt stifled by the array of rules, where to stand, how to address superiors, and how to keep one's posture perfectly upright, Thora found a kind of paradoxical freedom in the structure. She realized that through these obligations, she could meet people from many walks of life, gather stories, and use the influence of her position to do real good. It was in these years that her beloved mother began involving her more heavily in charitable causes. Princess Helena was establishing and supporting various nursing initiatives, such as the Royal British Nurses Association, to improve training standards for nurses. Observing these efforts, Thora admired her mother's unwavering drive and recognized a powerful template for her own future. It was in stepping behind the scenes, rolling up her sleeves, moving quietly through wards, or speaking gently to patients, that she found a sense of belonging. While extravagant balls could be dazzling, Thora felt her true calling was to stand humbly among those in need. Her relationship with her siblings also played a crucial role in shaping her worldview. Christian Victor, older than she by 2 years, was adventurous, spirited, and later destined to serve in the military. Albert, just younger than Christian Victor, possessed a more scholarly temperament, often engaging with philosophy or the sciences. Her younger sister, Louise, would eventually be known for a spirited personality and some measure of public attention. Between them, Thora found a balance. She borrowed something of Christian Victor's courage, something of Albert's intellect, and she bonded with Louise over shared philanthropic interests. They were a tight-knit family in many respects, though the looming figure of Queen Victoria, as matriarch, was always present in the background, reminding them of their duties and the weight of the royal name. By the 1890s, Thora had begun to carve out her own niche. She was increasingly drawn to organizations like the YWCA, Young Women's Christian Association, a group focused on the welfare and empowerment of women and girls. In an era when women's roles were rapidly evolving, yet still tightly constrained by societal expectations, Thora saw an opportunity. If she, a princess, could champion the cause of young women striving for education, housing, and fair work conditions, perhaps her voice could amplify their needs. Encouraged by her mother, and fascinated by the potential of philanthropic institutions, she dove into the YWCA's activities with a passion that surprised those who assumed that a princess would be more interested in lavish events. She attended numerous gatherings, not as a distant royal figurehead, but as a participant who listened earnestly. When she traveled to see the living conditions of women working in factories, she took notes, asked questions, and thought critically about the resources needed for improvement. Her motivations weren't purely philanthropic veneer either. She demonstrated real organizational skill. She wrote letters to potential donors, arranged charity events, and volunteered her own time to teach basic literacy in YWCA centers. She hosted piano recitals where the proceeds went directly to improving the organization's lodging facilities for young women. Attendees were sometimes astonished to see a royal princess not only performing but also speaking passionately about the challenges facing the women in industrial neighborhoods. There were moments of friction too, because some members of the old guard still looked askance at the notion that a princess might roll up her sleeves in such a hands-on manner. But Thora pressed on. Perhaps she felt that her life of relative comfort needed a meaningful counterbalance. Or perhaps, having witnessed firsthand the generosity of her mother, she simply recognized that philanthropic work was her true calling. Either way, she proved that a princess could be more than an ornamental figurehead. She could be a leader, an advocate, a determined force for positive change. As the Edwardian era began to take shape following Queen Victoria's passing in 1901, many members of the royal family sought new roles in the modernizing world. Thora's path remained anchored in service, though her sense of responsibility grew heavier when her father's German background stirred uneasy questions about national loyalties. Initially, these concerns were mild, overshadowed by the fact that Britain and many German principalities remained in a complicated but not overtly hostile relationship. However, the political climate was shifting. Rumblings on the continent suggested that alliances were fragile. Thora tried her best to remain focused on local philanthropic work, paying visits to shelters and volunteer organizations throughout London and beyond. She would return to Frogmore House or Cumberland Lodge at the end of each day with new observations about how to better improve the conditions of everyday people. Those around her noticed that she had a knack for empathy that outshone many of the more glamorous royals. She was neither a fashion icon nor a public speaker of flamboyant style. Instead, she excelled at forging genuine connections. Indeed, in diaries and letters from the period, local volunteers wrote of her with sincere admiration. It was said that she remembered names and personal details, the name of a child who was ill, or the difficulties a particular volunteer faced in traveling to the meeting hall, and would inquire about them during the next encounter. This consistency of care was something that set her apart. She wasn't there to posture. She was there to help. Even in an era that prized decorum, Thora managed to quietly break some of the more confining barriers of class and status. Then came the early 20th century's storms of conflict. The Boer War in South Africa, which occurred between 1899 and 1902, reached directly into her life. Her beloved brother, Prince Christian Victor, served in the conflict. The news of his death in 1900 was devastating. For a woman who had already committed herself to supporting soldiers, nurses, and the wartime cause, this personal loss delivered an emotional blow that might have caused another to retreat from public life. But Thora channeled her grief into an even stronger resolve. She recognized that every soldier who fell was someone's brother, husband, or son. The sense of personal loss fueled her empathy for countless other families grieving loved ones. In the wake of Christian Victor's passing, she redoubled her philanthropic endeavors, working closely with the Red Cross and supporting local convalescent homes for returning soldiers. It was a somber period, and yet her strength shone through in small, meaningful acts, like comforting widows or helping distribute funds so that wounded veterans could receive proper medical care. This resolve was tested yet again on a larger scale when the First World War erupted in 1914. Almost overnight, the public fervor against Germany and anything vaguely Germanic soared to dangerous heights in Britain. People who bore German names, even if they had lived in England for generations, faced suspicion, vandalism, or outright hostility. For Thora, whose official style was Princess Helena Victoria of Schleswig-Holstein, the situation was fraught with potential scandal. She was, after all, a descendant of the German line through her father, and the family name of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha was also shared by other British royals at the time. To protect the monarchy from the wave of anti-German sentiment, King George V famously changed the royal house's name to the House of Windsor in 1917. This eased some of the public pressure, but for Thora, the sense of divided loyalties was personally difficult. She had always considered herself thoroughly British, born and raised on English soil, devoted to English causes. Now, she had to work twice as hard to prove her allegiance. And work she did. Throughout the war, Thora threw herself headlong into philanthropic efforts. She took on leadership roles in the YWCA, the British Red Cross, and various war relief funds. She organized events where the proceeds went toward supporting wounded soldiers and constructing temporary field hospitals. She personally visited these hospitals, chatting with patients, listening to harrowing stories from the front lines and offering comfort where she could. Although many royals participated in the war effort in some capacity, Thora's unwavering presence made her stand out among them. She didn't simply show up for a photo op. She stayed to talk with families, to see what resources were lacking, and to strategize on how best to allocate funds. While some newspapers at the time noted her German paternal heritage, they could hardly ignore her tireless dedication to the British cause. Over time, her actions spoke so loudly that the criticism began to fade. The name Helena Victoria might still have conjured a complicated set of associations, but her charitable deeds became impossible to overlook. She built a reputation that transcended politics, forging a legacy of compassion and duty. In those turbulent years, she also confronted the usual expectations that a princess should marry and solidify ties with another royal family or aristocratic house. Yet Thora chose to remain single, an uncommon decision for a princess of her era. There was no dramatic scandal, no forbidden love story, no tumultuous heartbreak that forced her into spinsterhood. Rather, as many close to her revealed, she seemed genuinely content without the constraints of marriage. Perhaps it was that no suitor managed to capture her heart sufficiently to offset the duties she treasured above all else. Maybe it was that she felt her philanthropic commitments were all-consuming, leaving little room for the complexities of royal wedlock. While society whispered and speculated, was it a missed alliance, an unrequited affection, or simply fate? Thora quietly carried on with her charitable work. In a world that pressed young women of noble birth to think about potential alliances and the production of heirs, her single status might have set her apart even further, but if she was troubled by it, she rarely let it show, continuing her pattern of earnest devotion to public service. In the wake of the First World War, Europe was left reeling from massive casualties and a shaken sense of security. Thora observed that the aftermath demanded even more support for veterans, widows, and orphans, and she was among the first to join or sponsor new relief programs. Amid that reconstruction, she worked diligently alongside her mother, Princess Helena, supporting the nursing associations that had proven invaluable during the war. Princess Helena's own health began to wane in time, as the years took their toll on her. Thora stepped in to carry her mother's mantle, ensuring that the philanthropic networks remained strong. This period also saw her forging stronger ties with her sister, Louise, who likewise took part in charitable work, though often with a flair for publicity that Thora did not seek. When the 1930s rolled around, another storm gathered on the horizon. The rise of tensions in Europe once again plunged the continent toward conflict, and by 1939, World War II erupted. By this point, Thora was nearly 70 years old. Where many might have chosen to step into the background and retire from public life, she once again insisted on staying in London throughout the Blitz, doing what she could for morale. She had already lost family members, seen 2 global conflicts tear apart Europe, and carried the weight of decades of service. Nonetheless, she made herself a fixture in the efforts to support bombed-out civilians, working with the YWCA to provide shelter and sustenance to women and children displaced by air raids. She visited community centers, helped arrange shipments of food, blankets, and medical supplies, and continued to symbolize a brand of steadfast compassion that transcended fear. Her presence brought solace. If a royal who had every reason to seek refuge in safer countryside estates chose to remain in the city's heart, it spoke volumes about solidarity. This was a choice that resonated with a war-weary public, offering them a glimpse of reassurance that perhaps not everyone with a noble title was out of touch with the common struggle. Though advanced in years, she found renewed vigor in these tasks. Wartime diaries note her uncanny ability to inspire volunteers, many of them decades younger, to press on in the face of daunting circumstances. She did it not with fiery speeches, but with gentle conviction and unwavering dedication. Volunteers wrote of seeing her remain at a support center long after an air raid warning had sounded, comforting a frightened group of children huddled in a makeshift basement shelter. They recalled her calm voice reciting a poem in German, an ironic twist given the war at hand, and then translating it into English for the children, effectively bridging cultural gaps in the midst of turmoil. Such acts defined her brand of quiet heroism. Despite her commitment and courage, the war's toll was unavoidable. London was battered. The royal family had to carefully navigate the public eye, ensuring that they showed unity and resolve. Thora's advanced age meant that her health was no longer robust, and by the early 1940s, she showed visible signs of fatigue. Still, she attended gatherings, wrote letters, and offered steady leadership for organizations like the YWCA, the Red Cross, and the Royal British Nurses Association. She served as a living testament to the continuity of royal philanthropy, from Victorian times through to a new and dangerous modern era. Her single status no longer attracted the same curiosity or mild scandal it once had. Indeed, public opinion had evolved. People saw her for what she was, a woman wholly devoted to philanthropic causes, unburdened by the complexities of a royal marriage, and entirely focused on making a difference. By the end of World War II, Thora was nearing her late 70s. Britain was triumphant but exhausted, bearing the scars of bombing and the grief of so many lost lives. Royal ceremonies resumed, though on a more modest scale, and society tried to rebuild from the rubble. Thora's health began to decline noticeably. She found herself increasingly confined to her London residence, an apartment at Fitzmaurice Place in Berkeley Square. While she might have wished to do more in those final years, she continued to oversee charitable efforts through correspondence and smaller, carefully managed meetings, supporting post-war rehabilitation for the wounded and displaced. In March 1948, at age 77, she passed away in that London apartment. Perhaps it was fitting that her final breath was drawn in the midst of the city she had spent so many years serving, rather than in the quiet comfort of a distant country estate. Her death came as a sober moment. Britain was busy grappling with post-war reconstruction and the dawn of a new Elizabethan age. As Princess Elizabeth, then heir apparent, would soon ascend the throne. News of Thora's passing did not fill the headlines the way a major royal's death might have, but for those whose lives she had touched, veterans, nurses, volunteers, and especially the women of the YWCA, her loss was significant and poignant. Messages poured in from across the country. Quiet tributes, small donations in her name, letters of gratitude for her years of service. It was a testament to the depth of her impact that so many felt a personal connection to a princess who had largely avoided the spotlight. Her final resting place was at the Royal Burial Ground in Frogmore, near the resting places of her grandparents, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and not far from the house where she had been born 77 years before. It might be said that in her death, she returned to the place where it all began, a circle closed. Yet, unlike the unstoppable presence of her grandmother, whose name defined an era, Thora left behind a subtler legacy, wrapped in the gentle hum of philanthropic institutions that continued to thrive long after her passing. She did not pursue the loud acclaim that might have come from grand gestures or scandalous escapades. Instead, hers was a legacy measured in quiet transformations. Shelters built, hospitals funded, volunteers inspired, and countless lives touched.